Bret Stephens is the deputy editorial page writer for the Wall Street Journal. He writes the journal's Global View column on foreign affairs, runs every Tuesday, published in Europe and Asia as well as here. We're delighted to have Bret with us. Thank you for being with us, Bret.
Good to be on the show.
I was very interested in your most recent column concerning the administration's position with regard to human rights. I always thought the essence of liberalism was humanity and the looking out for those who could not look out for themselves. Obviously, that pertains at home with regard to the United States from a primary standpoint, but America's always been about, looking out for those who cannot look out for themselves, innocent men, women, and children by the thousands, is a part of its DNA for some time now, and this all seems to be changing under this administration, and nobody's talking about it much.
Yeah, well, in the old conventional wisdom, it was the Republicans like Richard Nixon who, when it came to foreign policy, just looked after the national interest, irrespective of who we had to deal with or whether human rights were at stake. Mm-hmm. Whereas it was the liberals, Franklin Roosevelt, who put liberty at the center of their foreign policy. I mean, that distinction is the historical facts are a little different, but that was the conventional view. Mm-hmm. Now you've got the world turned upside down. You had in President Bush a man who made freedom the center of his foreign policy agenda, who went out of his way to meet with political dissidents, who went out of his way to meet with the Dalai Lama, even if that irritated the Chinese, who spoke out against Burma, who called what was happening in Darfur genocide. And liberals wound up reviling him for that, for pursuing what in any normal sense would be called a liberal foreign policy.
Which is also Reagan's basic approach.
Well, exactly. I mean, Reagan was the guy who was looking out for the interests of solidarity in Poland, who told Ferdinand Marcos he had to go in favor of Corazon Aquino. There was an evolution in the Reagan administration, but at the end of the Reagan administration, beginning of the first Bush administration, what you had were the revolutions in Eastern Europe, the end of communism, and a recognition that what happens inside other countries, whether they're democracies or dictatorships, affects our security. Now, with President Obama, despite all of that high-flown rhetoric, despite his supposed personal appeal around the world, he is consistently reaching out to the worst sorts of dictators, whether we have a pressing national interest or not, whether it's Iran or, say, Burma. Engagement comes before everything, and he's doing this at the expense of the dissidents, of the political prisoners, of the democracy activists, of the people marching in the streets in Tehran, or those monks in their saffron robes in Rangoon. It seems to me that it's either the most cynical foreign policy I've seen in a very long time, or it's a very cowardly foreign policy because we're kowtowing to the dictators preemptively.
And really, instead of meeting with the Dalai Lama, or instead of meeting with Solzhenitsyn or anyone else like that, the president's actually distancing himself from human rights groups such as the ones in Iran.
Well, I mean, there's an incredible pattern here. Freedom House, one of the most venerable human rights organizations, Eleanor Roosevelt was one of its honorary chairpersons at one point. They had an Iranian democracy project defunded. They had an Egyptian democracy project defunded. There's an Iranian human rights documentation center in New Haven, Connecticut, that has been compiling records on the Iranian regime's history of atrocities going back 30 years. They had a grant request denied. The International Republican Institute, which does a lot of pro-democracy work around the world, they're seeing their funding cut off. We had, under the Bush administration, a $67 or $70 million fund to help democracy activists in Iran. That number has been cut. It seems the only area where the Obama administration is actually cutting budgets is in the comparative pennies and dimes that it was devoting to democracy movements around the world. And I think this is it's a misguided foreign policy. It's not going to serve us well in the long term, but it's just absolutely mystifying given what President Obama is supposed to represent.
Well, we know what you say about Iran is true. We know about what we're doing with regard to China. Hillary Clinton had in hand, obviously agreeing, saying not letting human rights issues interfere with these bigger things we have to worry about. But you mentioned the Sudan and Burma as places that the average American knows very little about. But they're places where the most ruthless. I think it was Sudan yesterday. I was watching some footage of what was happening there and how the people there were being driven out of their homes and out of their countries. They were the soldiers were coming in there and cutting off hands and feet. Of course, they're all encamped out there now, and disease will be next, and so what we're talking about. Untold numbers of lives. And it's not like, we need to send in the troops everywhere, but by engaging with these ruthless dictators, I mean, we're just perpetuating the circumstances that are causing all this, aren't we?
Listen, a year ago, I was looking through the Obama campaign's statements, and they were piling on the Bush administration, which had apparently been contemplating doing the policy that the Obama administration effectively has now announced this week. And one of the things that Obama said is that the regime in Khartoum this is a quote, has a record of failing to live up to its commitments, which is to say they cannot be trusted with making deals. That's what President Obama, or candidate Obama, was saying in April of 2008. That's not the ancient past. And this was an issue with which he was supposedly deeply engaged in. There was an emotional attachment, and now he's doing precisely that. He's putting the credit of the United States, expecting good behavior from a guy who, the dictator of Sudan, Omar Bashir, who at a minimum we should at least shun. I mean, this seems to me, you can make the argument with the Iranians, well, there's a nuclear program, so we have to engage them. I don't believe in that argument. That there are other problems with that argument, but at least there's a strategic case for it. Here, the question with Sudan or with Burma, it's strictly humanitarian.
Shun and shame them. I mean, exactly. This is the one area, a lot of times you're dealing with African nations. I mean, let's just put the cards on the table. This is the one area where Obama's popularity and his magnetism and his personality could do some good and save a lot of lives. And how far has it gotten us?
And why can't he apply the same pressure he's now applying mistakenly to Honduras for trying to stave off Chavez, and why not apply that kind of pressure to Sudan?
Unbelievable. Bret, thank you very, very much. This is extremely informative. Really appreciate it.